There's a city carved into solid rock where ancient people didn't just worship gods. They saw them physically, with their own eyes. Light would enter through carved doorways on specific days of the year, illuminate sacred stones, and the gods would appear, not as statues, not as symbols, but as visible, tangible presences manifesting in beams of sunlight. This wasn't imagination, this wasn't faith, this was engineered divinity. A city built as a machine to make gods materialize. And for over 1,000 years it worked. Pilgrims traveled across deserts to witness it. Kings commissioned monuments to capture it. Priests calculated celestial events to predict it. And then the city was abandoned, lost, forgotten for 500 years until a Swiss explorer stumbled through a narrow canyon in 1812 and found something impossible. Petra, the rose-red city, where architecture, astronomy, and religion combined to create the most sophisticated spiritual technology the ancient world ever built. And what I am about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about how ancient civilizations experienced the divine. The year is 50 BC, you're standing in front of a massive rock face in southern Jordan. The sun is setting on December 21st, the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. You've traveled for weeks to reach this place. You're tired, thirsty, exhausted, but you're here for a reason. Because today, in just a few minutes, you're going to see your God, not pray to him, not imagine him. See him with your own eyes. The monument in front of you is called Ad-Dir, the monastery, but that's a later name. Christians called it that centuries after the Nabateans abandoned it. To the people who built it, this was the house of Dushara, the dwelling place of the supreme deity, Lord of the mountains, God of the sun, and as the last rays of daylight cross the horizon, something extraordinary happens. A single beam of sunlight enters through the carved doorway. It travels 40 feet across the interior chamber, and it lands precisely on a square stone platform carved into the back wall, the sacred Motab, the throne of the god. For the Nabateans, this wasn't just light. This was Dushara himself, manifesting, appearing, present, and you're witnessing it. The god descending into the stone, illuminated by the sun's final rays, visible and real for just a few minutes before darkness falls. That's when you understand. This isn't a building. It's a doorway. A portal between the human world and the divine realm. And the architects who carved it 2,000 years ago knew exactly what they were doing. But how? How did an ancient civilization, without modern instruments, without computers, without any of the tools we take for granted, create structures that align perfectly with celestial events? That's the mystery at the heart of Petra. And the answer is more incredible than you think. Because the Nabateans didn't just build one aligned monument. They built dozens. All across the city, carved into cliffsides, hidden in valleys, positioned on mountaintops, temples, tombs, altars, all designed to capture light at specific times. Winter solstice, summer solstice, spring equinox, autumn equinox. Each event marked by a different structure. Each structure revealing a different aspect of the divine. And together, they formed a calendar carved in stone. A city that didn't just measure time but made time sacred. Made it visible. Made it divine. Keep watching because we're about to explore how they did it. And why modern scientists are only now beginning to understand the genius behind it. Petra sits in a valley surrounded by mountains. The Shara Mountains, high, jagged, remote. These mountains gave the city its greatest god, Dushara. His name literally means, he of the Shara Mountains, or Lord of the Mountains. He wasn't imported from Greece or Egypt. He was born from this landscape, from these rocks, from this specific place. And the way the Nabateans worshipped him was unlike anything else in the ancient world. They didn't carve statues of him. They didn't paint pictures. They didn't create idols in human form. Instead, they carved simple rectangular stones, beetles, sacred blocks, sometimes 4 feet tall, sometimes smaller, always geometric, always plain. And they believed that when light hit these stones, when the sun illuminated them at the right moment, Dushara entered them, became present in them, manifested through them. The stone wasn't a representation of the god, it was the god, made visible by light. This is what ancient sources tell us. A Greek historian named Epiphanius wrote about Petra in the 4th century CE, centuries after the Nabateans had declined but while their traditions still lingered. He described their worship practices, and he said something fascinating. He said the Nabateans celebrated the birth of Dushara during the winter solstice. They believed he was born from a virgin goddess, Al-Yuza, on the longest night of the year. And they celebrated his birth by watching light enter their temples and illuminate sacred stones. Birth, light, stone, God made visible. That's the core of Nabatean religion, and Petra was built to make it happen. Let's go back to that winter solstice at Ad-Dir. You're standing inside now. The chamber is about 30 feet wide. The ceiling is high, carved into the natural rock. At the back of the room there's a raised platform, the Motab. Stairs lead up to it on both sides, and on that platform there's a single rectangular stone. A beetle, carved from the same rock as everything else. Undecorated, simple, waiting. As the sun sets, light enters through the door. The angle is perfect, the timing is exact. And for just a few minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10, the beetle glows, illuminated, bright, standing out against the darkness of the surrounding rock. And every person in that chamber sees it, feels it, knows that Dushar is there, not abstract, not metaphorical. They're present, visible, and then the light fades. The sun drops below the horizon. Darkness fills the chamber, and the god withdraws, waiting for the next winter solstice, waiting for the next birth, waiting to appear again. That's the power of Petra. It didn't just teach people to believe in gods. It made them see gods. And once you've seen your God with your own eyes, belief becomes certainty. Faith becomes knowledge. And the priests who control that experience gain extraordinary power. Keep watching, because the monastery isn't the only place this happened. Petra is filled with these alignments. And each one reveals something new about how the Nabateans understood the relationship between earth, sky, and divinity. The Nabateans were traders, spice merchants. They controlled the incense route that ran from southern Arabia, where frankincense and myrrh grew, all the way north to Gaza and the Mediterranean. That trade made them incredibly wealthy. Wealthier than most kingdoms. And they used that wealth to build Petra. Not as a city in the traditional sense. Not with streets and houses and markets packed together. Petra was different. It was a sacred landscape. A religious center. A pilgrimage site. Yes, people lived there. Yes, there was commerce. But the real purpose of Petra was spiritual. It was built to facilitate encounters between humans and gods. And the way they did that was through architecture that manipulated light. Consider the scale. Petra covers about 100 square miles. Most of it is still unexcavated. Archaeologists estimate they've only explored 15% of the site. The other 85% is still buried, still hidden, still waiting to be discovered. But even with just 15% exposed, we can see the pattern. Temples aligned to equinoxes, tombs aligned to solstices, high places, open-air altars carved on mountaintops, positioned to capture sunrise or sunset at key moments. Over 800 carved monuments, over 500 tomb facades, dozens of temples, all oriented, all calculated, all designed. In 2013, a team of archaeoastronomers led by Juan Antonio Belmonte from the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands conducted a comprehensive study of Petra's monuments. They measured the spatial orientation of every major structure. They compared those measurements to the position of the sun on the horizon during solstices and equinoxes. And they found something shocking. About 70% of Petra's structures align with solar events. 7 out of 10 monuments are oriented to capture light during astronomical phenomena. That's not coincidence. That's intention. That's design. That's a city built as a solar temple. And nobody even realized it until 2013. Keep watching, because the most spectacular alignment hasn't even been revealed yet. Let's talk about the most famous structure in Petra, the one you've seen in movies. The one on every postcard. Al-Khazneh, the treasury. You approach it through a narrow canyon called the Sick, a natural gorge between towering cliffs. The walk takes about 20 minutes. The walls rise 260 feet on either side. The path is winding, dark, claustrophobic, and then suddenly at the end you see it. A glimpse of carved stone through the narrow opening. You keep walking. The glimpse expands. And then you emerge into an open space and the full facade of the treasury is revealed. It's massive, 130 feet tall, 90 feet wide. Carved directly into the rose-colored sandstone cliff. Columns, statues, pediments, all detailed. All impossibly precise for something carved 2,000 years ago without power tools. But here's what tourists don't know. What guides don't usually mention. The treasury is aligned, not to a solstice or equinox, but to something else. Something more subtle. Something that researchers are still debating. The facade faces almost due east, which means it catches the rising sun. Every morning, as the sun comes up, light floods across the treasury's front, illuminating the carved figures. But there's more. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, when the sun rises exactly in the east, the light enters the sick at a specific angle. It travels down the canyon, and it frames the treasury in a way that doesn't happen any other time of year. The contrast between shadow and light becomes dramatic, theatrical, designed. Some researchers believe the Nabateans timed pilgrimages to coincide with these moments. That visitors would walk through the dark sick and emerge into blinding sunlight with the treasury glowing before them, and that experience, that transition from darkness to light, was itself a religious ritual, a metaphor for divine revelation. You were walking through the underworld, the realm of shadow, and emerging into the realm of gods, the realm of light. The architecture was teaching you, transforming you, preparing you for what came next. But the treasury isn't a temple, at least not in the traditional sense. It's a tomb, probably built for a Nabatean king. Maybe Aratus IV, who reigned from 09 BCE to 40 CE, and that raises a fascinating question. Why would you build a tomb aligned to solar events? Why does it matter if light hits a burial monument? Because for the Nabateans, death wasn't an ending. It was a transformation. A passage from the physical world to the divine world. And kings, especially powerful kings, didn't just die, they became gods. There's evidence that at least one Nabatean king, Obote, was deified after his death. He became a god worshipped, given temples, given sacrifices. And if kings could become gods, then their tombs weren't just burial places, they were shrines. Places where the divine and human worlds met. Where light could animate the king's spirit. Where the sun, the ultimate source of life and power, could bring the deceased ruler into the realm of divinity. The treasury isn't just a monument, it's a machine. A device for transforming a dead king into a living god, and it works through light. Through alignment. Through the precise relationship between carved stone and moving sun. Keep watching because there's another structure in Petra that makes this even more explicit. A place where solar alignment isn't subtle. Where it's obvious, undeniable, spectacular, the urn tomb, built around 70 CE as a burial place for a Nabatean king. It's located on the eastern cliff face, overlooking the city center. The facade is 85 feet wide, 3 stories tall. And in front of it, there's a large colonnaded court, an open space where people could gather, where ceremonies could take place, where rituals could unfold. Inside, there's a single massive chamber carved into the rock. About 60 feet wide, 60 feet deep, high ceilings. And at the back of the chamber, there's a carved apse. A semicircular niche, and that apse is aligned. On the spring and autumn equinoxes, when the sun sets exactly in the west, light enters through the tomb's doorway. It travels across the chamber. And it illuminates the apse at the back. Precisely, exactly, intentionally. Researchers confirmed this in 2001 using modern measurement tools. They stood in the tomb during the equinox sunset. They watched as the light moved across the floor. And they watched as it landed perfectly on the carved niche. But here's what makes it even more incredible. The urn tomb wasn't just a tomb. In 446 CE, after the Nabateans were gone, after Petra had declined, after Christianity had spread across the region, Byzantine Christians converted the urn tomb into a church. They didn't build a new structure. They used the existing tomb. Why? Because the alignment already matched their calendar. The equinoxes in Christianity mark important dates. The spring equinox is near Easter. The autumn equinox is near the Feast of the Cross. And the Byzantines realized that the tomb solar alignment could serve Christian rituals just as it had served Nabatean rituals. The light still worked. The architecture still functioned. Only the interpretation changed. From a Nabatean king's transformation into divinity to Christ's resurrection. From one god to another. But the light remained. The alignment endured. The stone continued to do what it was designed to do. Capture sunlight, make the divine visible, transform belief into experience. But it's not just the equinoxes. The summer and winter solstices also create phenomena at the urn tomb. In 2013, Juan Antonio Belmonte's team discovered that during the summer solstice sunset, light enters the tomb and illuminates a different part of the chamber. A corner, a specific carved feature. And during the winter solstice, another feature is highlighted. The tomb isn't aligned to just one event. It's aligned to multiple events. 4 astronomical moments throughout the year, and each one creates a different visual effect. A different message, a different revelation. This is sophisticated. This is advanced. This required generations of observation. Watching the sun, tracking its movement. Recording where it rises and sets throughout the year. Understanding the patterns, the cycles. The subtle shifts that happen over centuries. The Nabateans didn't have telescopes. They didn't have computers. But they had time. They had patience and they had motivation. Because if you can control when and how gods appear, you control belief. You control power. You control society. And that's what Petra was built to do. Control the divine, make it predictable. Make it visible. Make it undeniable. Keep watching because we haven't even talked about the high places yet. The mountaintop altars where sacrifices were made and gods were called down from the sky. High places. The Nabateans loved them. All across Petra, on the peaks of surrounding mountains, you find carved rock sanctuaries, flat platforms, carved steps, water channels, basins for collecting blood, altars for burning offerings, all exposed to the sky. No roofs, no walls, just open-air worship under the sun and stars. The most famous is the high place of sacrifice on Jebel Madba, a mountain that overlooks the city center. You climb 800 steps carved into the rock to reach it. And at the top, you find a large courtyard about 50 feet by 100 feet. Completely flat, perfectly level, carved out of solid rock. There are 2 altars, one large, one small, both rectangular. Both with channels carved into them for draining blood from sacrificed animals. There's a large basin for collecting water. And there are carved niches in the surrounding rock walls. Places for details. Places for sacred stones. Places where gods could manifest. The high place isn't aligned to a single solar event. It's aligned to the entire sky. From this elevation, you can see the horizon in every direction. You can watch the sun rise in the east, set in the west. You can track the moon. Observe planets. Follow the stars as they wheel overhead. This was an observatory. A place for watching celestial movements. For recording them. For understanding them. And for connecting them to religious rituals. Animal sacrifices weren't random. They were timed. Coordinated with astronomical events. A lamb sacrificed at sunrise on the spring equinox. A goat offered at sunset on the summer solstice. Bulls, sheep, doves, all offered at specific moments when the position of celestial bodies indicated divine presence, divine attention, divine favor. And the priests who controlled this knowledge, who knew when to sacrifice and when to withhold, held enormous power. They were intermediaries, gatekeepers, the only ones who could ensure that offerings reached the gods. That prayers were heard, that blessings were granted. The high places weren't just altars, they were control centers. Places where religion and astronomy merged into a system of power. And Petra had dozens of them. Keep watching, because there's one more structure we need to explore. The most important temple in the entire city. The place where Dushara was worshipped daily. Where his beetle sat on a golden throne. Khazar Albint, the temple of the daughter of Pharaoh. That's the name locals gave it centuries after the Nabateans were gone. But originally this was the main temple of Petra, the central sanctuary. The dwelling place of Dushara. Built around 30 BCE during the reign of King Obodas III. It's one of the few structures in Petra that wasn't carved into rock. It was built. Constructed with cut stone blocks, massive, heavy, precisely fitted. The temple stands about 75 feet tall. The facade is 90 feet wide. And inside there's a large chamber with a raised platform at the back, the motab. The sacred throne, where the betil of Dushara sat. Ancient sources describe it. A Greek writer named Epiphanius, quoting even older texts, said the betil was a black rectangular stone, 4 feet tall, 2 feet wide, unhewn, uncarved, natural, and it sat on a base of gold. Gold, not stone. not wood, gold. That's how important this object was. The physical manifestation of the supreme god displayed on a golden throne in the most important temple in the city. And according to the descriptions, priests would sacrifice animals in front of it, pour blood on it, anoint it, believing that the god was present within the stone, that Dushara could see through it, hear through it, respond through it. The stone wasn't a symbol, it was a body. The physical form the god inhabited in the human world. But here's what makes Khazar al-Bint even more fascinating. The temple is aligned, not to a solstice or equinox, but to something more subtle. The temple faces almost due east, which means the rising sun enters through the main door every morning. But on certain days, the light penetrates deeper. It travels all the way to the back of the temple, all the way to the Motab, all the way to the Beetle. And on those days, the stone glows, illuminated, activated, made divine through light. Researchers haven't determined exactly which days create this effect. The temple is partially ruined. The roof is gone. The internal chambers are damaged. But the alignment is there. The intention is clear. This temple was designed to channel sunlight onto the sacred stone, to make Dushara visible, to prove his presence. Day after day, year after year, century after century. And people believed it. They came from across the Nabatean kingdom, from as far as Syria in the north and Arabia in the south. Pilgrims, traders, kings, all coming to Petra, all coming to see Dushara, all coming to witness light transform stone into divinity. That's the power of this architecture. It doesn't require faith. It creates experience, and experience is more powerful than belief. You can doubt what you're told. You can question what you're taught. But you can't deny what you see with your own eyes. And in Petra you saw gods. That's what made this city sacred. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it last for over 1,000 years. Keep watching, because we need to talk about the astronomers. The priests who made all of this possible. The people who understood the sky well enough to carve it into stone. Who were the Nabatean astronomers? We don't know their names. We don't have their writings, but we know they existed. Because you can't create the alignments in Petra without deep astronomical knowledge. You need to know where the sun rises and sets throughout the year. You need to understand that those positions change. That the summer solstice sunrise happens in a different location than the winter solstice sunrise. That the equinoxes mark the midpoint. You need to track the moon, its 29-day cycle, its phases, its relationship to the sun. The Nabateans used a lunisolar calendar. A calendar that synchronized moon phases with solar years. That's complicated. You need to add extra months every few years to keep everything aligned. You need mathematical precision, observational accuracy, generational continuity. And the Nabateans had all of that. Evidence comes from inscriptions, stone tablets with dates, references to festivals, mentions of astronomical events. One inscription found at Petra mentions a festival for Dushara tied to the spring equinox. Another references Aluza and the autumn equinox. The calendar wasn't arbitrary, it was cosmic, tied to celestial movements, tied to the gods, because the gods were celestial. Dushara was the sun. Aluza was Venus, the evening star. Manitou was the moon. And the lesser gods were associated with planets, constellations, specific stars. The sky wasn't separate from religion. The sky was religion. And the Nabatean priests were astronomers by necessity. They had to be, because their entire system of worship depended on knowing exactly when celestial events would occur. Miss a solstice by a day and the light wouldn't hit the Betil. The god wouldn't appear. The ritual would fail and people would lose faith. So they watched, they measured, they recorded. They passed knowledge from generation to generation. And they built monuments that encoded that knowledge in stone. Permanent, durable, lasting long after the priests themselves were gone. But there's something else. Something that modern researchers are just beginning to understand. The Nabateans didn't just observe the sky. They worshipped it, literally. Strabo, a Greek geographer writing around 25 BCE, said the Nabateans prayed to the sun, not to a sun god, to the sun itself. The physical, burning, life-giving star in the sky. That's unusual. Most ancient cultures personified celestial objects. They created gods with human characteristics, and said those gods lived in the sky. But the Nabateans seemed to have taken a more direct approach. The sun was divine, period. It didn't need to be personified. It didn't need stories or myths. It was power. It was light. It was life. And when you watched it rise every morning, when you felt its warmth, when you saw plants grow, and water evaporate and seasons change because of it, you didn't need to imagine a god. The sun was the god, and Dushara was the name they gave to that divinity. The way they related to it, the way they worshipped it, and Petra was the place they built to capture it, to channel it, to make it interact with the human world through precisely calculated architecture. This wasn't primitive superstition. This was sophisticated solar theology. And it worked. For centuries it worked, until Rome came, until Christianity arrived, until new gods replaced old ones and the solar alignments lost their meaning. But the stone remains. The architecture endures. And if you visit Petra today during a solstice or equinox, the light still does what it was designed to do. The beams still enter the temples. The beetles still glow. The magic still happens. Even though nobody worships it anymore. Even though nobody believes, the stone remembers what it was built to do, and it keeps doing it. Waiting for someone to notice. Waiting for someone to understand. Waiting for someone to see what the Nabateans saw 2,000 years ago. Keep watching because we're about to explore what happened when all of this ended. When Petra was abandoned. When the gods stopped appearing. In 106 CE, the Roman Empire annexed Nabatea. It wasn't a violent conquest. It was political, strategic. The last Nabatean king, Rabel II, died without a clear successor. And Rome, which had been expanding eastward for decades, stepped in. They renamed the region Arabia Petrea, made Petra a Ramang provincial capital, built roads, introduced their own gods, changed the culture. At first, Petra continued. The temples still functioned. Dushara was still worshipped, though now he was called Duzaris and sometimes equated with the Roman god Jupiter. But the decline had begun, because Petra's power had always come from trade, from controlling the incense route. And Rome was building new trade routes, sea routes. Ships could carry spices from Arabia to Egypt to Rome faster and cheaper than caravans could cross the desert. Petra's economy collapsed, slowly, over decades. Merchants left. Population decreased. Buildings fell into disrepair. And then in 363 CE, an earthquake struck. Massive. Devastating. It destroyed much of the city. Collapsed buildings. Cracked monuments. Killed hundreds, maybe thousands. Petra never recovered. By the 5th century, most of the city was abandoned. Only a small Christian community remained, living among the ruins, converting old Nabatean temples into churches. And then even they left. By the 7th century, when Islam spread across the region, Petra was empty. Ghost city. Lost. The only people who knew it existed were local Bedouin tribes who used the tombs as shelters and told stories about the ruins. Stories that mixed history with legend. Stories that called the treasury the hiding place of a pharaoh's treasure. Stories that said jinn, spirits, haunted the carved facades. And for over 1,000 years, the Western world forgot Petra existed. Until 1812. A Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt was traveling through the Middle East, disguised as an Arab merchant. He'd heard rumors, stories about ancient ruins hidden in the mountains of Jordan, and he wanted to see them. But the local tribes were suspicious of foreigners, protective of the site. So Burckhardt invented a story. He said he wanted to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of Aaron, Moses' brother, which was located on a mountain near Petra. The Bedouin guides believed him. They agreed to take him. And to reach Aaron's tomb, you have to pass through Petra. You have to walk through the sick. You have to see the treasury. And Burckhardt saw it. He realized immediately what he was looking at. Ancient architecture, monumental scale, precision carving. This wasn't just ruins. This was a lost city. A hidden civilization. He took notes. Made sketches. And when he published his account in 1828, after his death, the Western world learned about Petra for the first time in over a millennium. Archaeologists, historians, artists, they all wanted to see it. Expeditions began. Excavations started. And slowly, piece by piece, the story of the Nabateans was reconstructed. But one thing remained mysterious. Why were all these monuments carved in such specific ways? Why did they face certain directions? Why were doorways positioned at particular angles? It wasn't until 2013, over 200 years after Burckhardt's discovery, that researchers finally understood. The solar alignments, the astronomical orientations, the entire city designed as a sacred calendar. Petra wasn't just beautiful. It was functional, it was engineered, it was a machine for making gods visible. And for 2,000 years, nobody realized it. Keep watching because we're about to talk about what this means. What it tells us about ancient religion, about the relationship between architecture and belief, about how humans have always tried to make the invisible visible. Petra forces us to reconsider what we think we know about ancient religion. We tend to imagine ancient people as naive, superstitious, believing in myths and legends because they didn't know better. But Petra shows us something different. These people were scientists, engineers, astronomers. They understood celestial mechanics. They tracked solar and lunar cycles with precision. They knew that the sun's position on the horizon changes throughout the year. They knew how to predict those changes. And they used that knowledge to create religious experiences. Not through deception, not through lies, but through architecture, through the manipulation of natural phenomena. When a Nabatean priest told a pilgrim that Dushara would appear at sunset, it wasn't a metaphor, it wasn't symbolic. The god actually appeared, light entered the temple, the batil glowed, and everyone saw it. That's not superstition. That's applied astronomy. That's engineering in service of theology. And it raises a fascinating question. Did the Nabatean priests believe their own system? Did they think the sun was literally the god Dushara? Or did they understand that they were creating a spectacle, a visual effect to inspire belief in others? We don't know. The Nabateans left no theological texts, no philosophical treatises, just the stones, just the alignments, just the evidence of what they built. But here's what we can say. Whether they believed it or not, it worked. For over 1,000 years, Petra functioned as a religious center. People traveled vast distances to worship there. Kings invested enormous resources in building and maintaining it. The priests who controlled it wielded significant power. And all of that was based on architecture that made gods visible. That's extraordinary. That's genius. That's proof that ancient civilizations understood psychology, perception, and belief in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. Modern researchers are now looking at other ancient sites with new eyes, asking new questions. Are the pyramids of Egypt aligned to stars? Yes. Is Stonehenge aligned to solstices? Yes. Are Mayan temples oriented to celestial events? Yes. Are cathedrals in Europe designed to capture light during specific Christian feast days? Yes, this pattern is global, universal, across cultures, across continents, across millennia. Humans have always built structures to capture and display light in ways that feel sacred, that create awe, that inspire reverence. And Petra might be the most sophisticated example ever discovered, because it's not just one building, it's an entire city. A landscape transformed into a calendar, a geography converted into theology. Every mountain, every valley, every carved facade, all working together to create a comprehensive system for experiencing the divine. And the more we study it, the more we find. In 2015, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar discovered a massive platform buried beneath the sand near the city center. It's about 184 feet by 161 feet, elevated, with columns, with stairs, and it's aligned. Of course it's aligned. To what, they're still determining. But it's there, hidden, waiting. One more piece of the solar puzzle that is Petra. How many more are there? How many structures are still buried? How many alignments haven't been discovered yet? Nobody knows. Because 85% of Petra is still unexcavated. Still hidden. Still waiting for researchers with the right tools and the right questions. And every year they find something new. Another temple, another alignment. Another piece of evidence that the Nabateans understood the sky better than we ever imagined. Keep watching because we're almost at the end. And I want to leave you with one final thought. One question that Petra forces us to ask. What does it mean to see a god? That's the question at the heart of Petra. For us, in the modern world, gods are abstract, invisible, matters of faith and belief. You can't see them. You can't touch them. You can only believe in them. Or not. But for the Nabateans, gods were visible, tangible, present. When light hit a sacred stone, Dushara was there. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, actually there. You could see him. You could point to him. You could say, look, that's the god right there, glowing in the sunlight. That's a completely different religious experience than anything we have today. And it raises profound questions. If you can engineer a god's appearance, if you can make divinity predictable and visible, does that make it more real or less real? Does it strengthen faith or weaken it? The Nabateans would probably say it strengthens it, because seeing is believing. Experience is more powerful than doctrine. You can argue about theology. You can debate scripture. But you can't argue with your own eyes. If you saw the god appear, you know he's real. End of discussion. But there's another perspective. If the divine is just light hitting stone at the right angle, if it's just solar mechanics and clever architecture, then maybe it's not divine at all. Maybe it's just physics, just engineering, just human ingenuity creating the illusion of divine presence. That's the tension at the heart of Petra. Is what the Nabateans built sacred or profane? Divine revelation or human invention? The answer probably depends on what you believe about the nature of divinity itself. If you believe gods are separate entities, supernatural beings that exist independently of human understanding, then Petra,